Okay, so we have seen the traditional view of the business environment. Let's look now at the ecosystem view of business environments. This is a very interesting and relatively recent idea emerging in the context of theories of the business environment. So the plan for the upcoming videos is as follows. We're going to start with a look at what exactly an ecosystem is. We'll give you some basic definitions and some examples as well. From there, then we're going to move into ecosystems in the business context, the modern business context. In section 3, we're going to look at two key concepts in the context of the ecosystem theory, and those are mutuality and orchestration. In section 4, we're going to look specifically at digital business platforms and how important they have become in the context of ecosystems. In section 5, we're going to look at the crucial question of how value is created in ecosystems. And then in section 6, we're going to finish by summarizing the main differences between the ecosystem view and that traditional view that we studied in a previous video. And so we start with a basic question. What exactly is an ecosystem? Well, we're going to look here at a basic definition of what an ecosystem is, but don't worry if you don't immediately grasp exactly what we're talking about. That will become clear as we go through these videos by applying the concept and looking at how it functions in the real world with various examples. But it is a good place to start with a basic definition, and here it is. An ecosystem can be defined as a complex web of interdependent enterprises and relationships aimed at creating and allocating business value. Ecosystems tend to be broad, potentially spanning multiple geographies and industries, including public and private institutions and consumers. Okay, a lot of words there, a lot of concepts, and a lot to take in. So let's start with some more general characteristics to clarify some of these ideas and concepts. Ecosystems are, when compared to the traditional view of business environments, they're more collaborative than the traditional view. If you recall, we talked about how adversarial organizations and companies are within a traditional market or traditional industry. Less adversarial, therefore, there's less conflict. Companies tend not to see each other in those terms as zero-sum adversaries in the competition for market share and profit. It requires organizations to view themselves as participants rather than simply static rivals who are always going to be in a combative relationship with their competitors. They also have to conceive of themselves in an ecosystem as adapting and evolving, much like the natural world ecosystems. That's where the term comes from, after all. It comes from the biological context of natural ecosystems, and exactly the same is the case in the business environment. You need to adapt and evolve to what has become, especially in recent decades, a highly fluid environment. Business environments are changing so rapidly now with the advent of digital technologies and the internet. Okay, so let's look at an example to clarify this further. We have the smartphone ecosystem. So in a traditional market, you would think of buyers and sellers, and you would have the industrial chain of supply and distribution, logistics and marketing that serves that final end customer. It's a very linear kind of relationship. However, in the case of ecosystems, we're dealing more with networks, very complex networks, lots of interdependencies and non-linear relationships. So for example, if you think about the smartphone industry, you have, of course, as we saw before, you have companies like Samsung and Apple. And of course, in this industry, they have a huge network of suppliers and distributors and logistics and sellers and so on and so forth. And then, of course, as well, you have the end user, the end consumer. But in the case of smartphones, you have a huge related ecosystem of things like applications. So you have companies with applications, and those applications need to be compatible with those smartphones, or rather, I should say, those smartphone producers need to ensure that their phones are compatible with various applications. And of course, then as well, you need to be able to access those applications via a store application on your smartphone, and so you have to take that into account as well. You have things like interconnectivity with other smart devices. You have, for example, the ability now to project from your smartphone screen to a larger screen in the same room via Wi-Fi connectivity. And of course, if those two devices are compatible, that's going to enhance the usability and the value of that smartphone for the user. It's especially valuable if you can do that with non-branded or other brand devices. So, for example, you don't necessarily, as a smartphone manufacturer, want to limit that ability to other devices from your own company. You don't want it to be the case, for example, that only Samsung televisions will be able to connect with Samsung smartphones. You might want actually it to be an open-ended thing where your device can connect with many different brands of screens and other devices. And so you have to think about collaborating with, or indeed being open to, your phone being compatible with many rival organizations' devices. And then you have things like 5G, these networks and infrastructures within which the smartphone operates. You have to ensure that your devices are up to date, that they're compatible with these emerging technologies, and that they're compatible with the infrastructures that are being put in place, for example, by organizations like governments and other stakeholders as well. So you can see just in this very simple case, a very, very common and a very, very visible industry like the smartphone industry, there's a huge amount that's going on. It's so complex. There's a huge web and network of relationships and potential collaborations and things that need to be taken into account, and potentially collaborating with rivals and rival companies and organizations to ensure that the end customer's value is increased, but that all people indeed within the industry, all stakeholders, that their experience is enhanced and is not prohibited or restrained in any unnecessary way. So that's a good early understanding or early indication of what an ecosystem would look like.